Welcome to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, where we celebrate the craft of poetry. Each week we feature interviews with incredible poets, songwriters, and artists, including Olivia Gatwood, Safia El Hilo, Dana Gioia, and many more. We also feature periodic submitted poetry episodes. Visit viewlesswings.com to submit your original poetry. I'm your host, James Morehead, Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, and author of Canvas, Portraits of Red and Gray, and The Plague Doctor. Hit subscribe and follow me on Instagram or Threads at Viewless Wings. On this week's episode of the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, I'm going to read a poem from my first book, Canvas. This time of year, as Thanksgiving approaches, I always think of growing up in New England and the wonderful autumn weather and fall colors. Falling. With a damp chill and shortening days, I drive past Dorset at autumn's peak. High above, white clouds stroll, puffed in promenade, held delicate together by slender contrails. And morning sun softly warms a crisp early breeze, sending lake shimmered ripples, a cumulus mirror. I step into a forest, maples rooted firm in Canadian shield, feet meandering in search of a tickling leaf crunch. All the while, drinking air soaked yellow, orange, red, brown. In time, the breeze grows unsettled around, a bluster that rips determined leaves from their perches, scattering like startled butterflies, a colorful, stochastic flutter. I walk alone, thankful, threatening nimbus halts its advance, and slip through the leaves, past seasons, years, decades, transported from Canada to a New England vista, passing through time and space into a 70s country wagon, where the roads, ever curving, slide me across the trunk floor as we slip onto gravel in search of a fall fare. Touching a pumpkin's husk hurls me again into space, to Boston's Freedom Trail outside Faneuil Hall, with autumn colors draping the worn graves of patriots, and the tickling crunch unchanged despite decades passing. Through Boston Common, King's Chapel, down ever-twisting walkways where artists balance canvases and sketch with fingerless gloves. In a moment, falling again through the city to rural Vermont, winding through postcard towns and white-painted gazebos, nestled still in rust-draped Appalachians. I step into Waterbury, hugged warm in a peacoat, strolling down uneven sidewalks past sleeping storefronts, to stir and crunch leaves from their wind-structured stacks. Finally falling, surrounded, the sweet scent of decay burrowing deep into earth, past shadow-seeking light, until mildew and gray give way to Newton, Massachusetts morning, sunshine bright, sparkling through orange-tinged edges. Leaping out of the pile, a burst of oak and elm, distant memories of youth when time had no meaning. And now, each fall passing and cycle of leaves, autumn's behind me stacked higher than waiting ahead, I cling to each breath of crisp-scented breeze and try not to blink, looking out over the trees, and listen to each crunch as I step through the leaves until I catch a fell maple to welcome me home. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, And I'll be back next week with another Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast interview. The Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast is written and produced by James Morehead. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at Viewless Wings. Hit subscribe to be notified of every episode of the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast and spread the word with your poetry community.